go to the crown jewel of the ninth racing, of course, of Formula 1, the Singaporean Grand Prix. And here from our exclusive, which I'm sure you love very much, the setup, we will tell you everything in this exclusive race reaction to the 18th Grand Prix of this pulsating 2025 Formula 1 season. We will tell you everything from the perspective of Ferrari's biggest fan, of how this race on the streets where Ferrari never loses, how it panned out. Obviously, it probably, wasn't one of the best. In fact, it was one of the worst performances that we put in. But overall, I have to say, that in this race reaction, we will examine exactly, how we could have gone with the fireworks and the winning trophy, out of this grueling Singaporean race that really took a toll on these heroic drivers, which were, of course, checked very tightly by the security to make sure that they have all the predispositions to dominate around the streets here and the city that is closest to the equator, and that obviously, first hosted this ninth race of Formula 1 back in 2008, and now in 2025, it is pretty much a staple and a very important race, which kind of, brings the curtain down on this chapter of the Asian and the Euro-Asian races, as we then, go to the Americas and then back, to the Middle East to decide who will be the Drivers' Championship, because as you know, the Constructors' Championship has very sadly been decided with 6 races to go. You can see, on that lovely calendar there to my right that, the United States Grand Prix, the Mexican Grand Prix, the Brazilian Grand Prix, our favorite Las Vegas Grand Prix, then the Qatar Grand Prix and the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Not the red but the orange team will sadly go into it as the Constructors' Champion for this year, which is obviously very, very disappointing, from our perspective, but there is still a lot to salvage from the season. So, where to start, right? So, the great thing was obviously both drivers sporting special edition helmets here for the Singaporean race, which was run actually quite a bit late. Usually, it is run in the middle of the September, but now taking place at the beginning of the October, again coinciding, I guess, with the Moon Festival, which is pretty handy because that festival is actually happening, right today, on Monday, obviously, the October 6th, because we always recording the reaction 24, hours after the race happens, so that, everybody in Singapore could really, go out and enjoy the race. But actually, it was a bit of a stalemate, which made qualifying even more important. So, as both drivers, obviously, Leclerc in a bit more of a blue fashion, and Hamilton in that really timeless, golden helmet, which looked really, really good. I mean, I love the Michael Schumacher's helmet, you cannot see it, but right behind, obviously, that, Scarlet Red iPhone that is recording this video, I actually do have the Michael Schumacher's, golden cap that kind of mimics his golden helmet that he has worn on several occasions, and, with Hamilton, it looked great, again. Some people were recommending, that maybe we should make that Ferrari fashion, right? With a little bit of the golden accents. Well, we would probably have to win the Constructors' Championship, but yeah, absolutely, it looked absolutely amazing. And yeah, it promised to be, quite exciting race, and it was pretty much all about qualifying. That's why we are talking about, for example, what helmets the drivers were sporting and so on, because again, once, you don't do well, especially in qualifying 3, and, once you line up, a little bit on the 3rd, 4th row on a grid, or last year we were 4th and 5th row, as you do know, it was going to be a tough race, and it's really disappointing because we had some famous victories over here, and obviously both drivers, maybe not driving in the SF1000T in Formula 1 Racing Simulator, but definitely giving it its all. It promised so much, and, it delivered so little for us. But hey, there are some positives to take. So, where do we start before we take a look at, obviously the overall standings, especially we had to, wait a little bit with the recording of this exclusive race reaction with the Scuderia Redratina Hymek, because obviously there has been investigation again into Lewis Hamilton, and, it's surprising, right? The driver who has the most pole positions, obviously the most race victories, and with my childhood hero Michael Schumacher, the most championships, why is he always getting into trouble, right? Already, in the free practices, he was kind of someone to appear in front of the stewards, for speeding under the red flag conditions. It was kind of touch and go, but thankfully we were cleared. I couldn't believe that we would get another grid penalty, but sadly, due to what happened at the end of the Singaporean Grand Prix, Hamilton still, has gotten a penalty, but it has a minor effect on the final result. So we look good in practice, but again, it was kind of hard to say, who was really on the pace. Qualifying one, we've done a great job. Hamilton on the top of 129.7. That looked promising. Obviously, I did 127.7. You've seen that amazing race that I've done in Singapore. Scoring my second very, very popular, very amazing victory. Obviously, overtaking all of the championship contenders like the real champion I am. And I just wish, either Hamilton or Leclerc were able to do the same. But once we went to qualifying 2, qualifying 3, apparently, according to what the 7-time champ said, from just waiting, in the pit lane, and basically the tires cooling down and then not having enough of the grip, right, enough of the rubber so that you can tackle all of the corners. Because again, Singapore, it's a lot about the confidence, but it's a lot about, attacking the corners, being able, to pretty much, get on the gas as quickly as you can, just like I've shown you in the hot lap, so that you can get out of, the corners very quickly, right, and then again, having strong brakes, to be able, then to turn in and, use the traction. And basically, with the softer, compounds, it's quite difficult, especially to get to the end of the lap and still have the premium grip available, right? So if you are waiting in the pit lane, and obviously the tire temperatures drop a little bit, the tire temperatures, they have to be around 90 degrees Celsius, for both fronts and both rears, you obviously are gonna be losing a bit of a performance, right? And you don't want to be going maybe a bit too fast, for example, once you emerge out of the pits on your outlet, because then again, you are losing that precious, or using that precious grip, before you are actually due to get it. But again, I didn't have problems, in qualifying, and usually as Scuderia Ferrari, we've done really, really well. But it was clear that the qualifying 3, once Russell put in 129.1, that nobody was going to match it. Obviously Hamilton did 129.7. So I believe, the pace, to tackle Russell was there. I mean, at the end of the day, he had to kiss the wall. You see lots of the videos on my amazing YouTube channel, right? From that very spot, because that is obviously the permanent, track, around the Marina Bay there, right, where you can walk that, the final few corners of the track. And clearly Russell has gotten the pole position because he has pushed the limits in that final chicane underneath the highway. And the other drivers perhaps haven't done that. But if Hamilton has done 129.7, he definitely should have been able, to challenge it, and 128.9 certainly was possible. As it was, obviously, we line up on the grid in a relatively, disappointing formation. Obviously, being again, not really starting, where perhaps, we expected, with 6 and 7. But, once the red lights, went out, obviously the trend of the rain subsidized. So maybe, not sure, obviously the rainy races didn't, kind of fit us well, this year. But then, once the trend of the rain was gone, right, the race was bone dry. We've gotten a pretty good start. Leclerc obviously has gotten a better start on the clean side of the grid. Hamilton has tumbled down the order, so fell basically, to 7. Leclerc did a great job, getting into the 5th place. With regards to the title fight, I cannot believe that Verstappen once again, lifted so much on the apex of the turn 3, making Norris kind of, nudge into him, and then Piastri. It would have been great if there was a repeat of 2017, but this time Verstappen caused the collision with both orange cars. They would all be out, and obviously then it would be only between us and Russell, because I think it was very clear, especially at the end of the race, when Hamilton was running in the free air, that we did have the race winning pace. But once you stuck in the pack, basically there was no overtaking, right? So we had Russell, who pulled up the gap, and that was in his first stint, almost 10 seconds, and that was really the key to the second victory for Mercedes-Benz this season, which obviously is a bit of a disaster for us, because now we are losing quite a lot of points. So it will be interesting to see what happens in that final fourth of the season. Then Verstappen was able to hold off Norris. I think Piastri was never into it. We tried pretty well with Leclerc, that kind of the undercut. That obviously we started on a mediums, right? Verstappen, it was the only front runner who started on a soft, so he also did try that undercut, so to speak, but again, at the time, Russell was already too far. Actually, Piastri was, I think we could have gotten him. But the problem was that, once Leclerc emerged out of the pits, he was, stuck behind, some of the cars who didn't stop yet. Then you have to, make that overtake, and you are unable, for example, to pull up, few seconds on the car running ahead of you. And especially, I kind of don't understand the strategy, right? If you start on the mediums and you are able to get to lap 20, 25, now Singapore is run over 62 laps, but the track is significantly shorter than what it used to be. So you're not going to be running for 2 hours. What I didn't understand with Leclerc, right, is why we didn't put on the soft tires or just extended the stint. Clearly, it worked really well, for example, for Sainz, right? Who just, stay in, run on the mediums for example, 40 laps, and then was actually able to get through the field, kind of like when I was, running the race. And you could have seen, just that pace difference. So basically, when you go from the medium to the hard tire, they are the C4, C3 compounds. That undercut is not as powerful as it used to be, for example, in 2019, when Vettel pulled 5 seconds on Leclerc, right? Which is what we kind of needed to maybe, overtake undercut Piastri and then get into the fight with Norris and Verstappen. Who knows, any safety car could have put us closer to Russell, who was really struggling on the hard tires. He lost basically most of his 10 plus second lead in that final stint. There were only 2 stints, but you can see, that I was in my record-breaking F1 2024-2024 season actually running 2 stops, and I do believe, as Hamilton proved, it was the better strategy, right? So Hamilton stopped a little bit later, and that was kind of unable, obviously, to even though the pit stop went relatively well, we didn't get stuck in traffic. It was clear that Antonelli was pushing Leclerc, right? Because Leclerc obviously, because he stopped a little bit earlier, he was in front of Antonelli, but then he didn't have as much of a grip for example, the final third of the race. And let's not forget, the playing issues are definitely, seriously harming us, because we were basically just a couple of seconds behind Piastri and finish again, just like in Hungary, almost half a minute down the road. I believe different tire pressures were given to different sets of tires. But when Hamilton switched to the softs, he was flying, right? He set the fastest lap, and with that fastest lap of 133.808, symbolizing that 8th World Championship he's aiming for. I do believe, that if we were, for example, leading the race, we definitely could have won the race. So it was all about qualifying, because you could have seen that once Hamilton was in a clear air on the soft tires, he was able to, within 10-12 laps, to make up these 22 seconds on Antonelli, who overtook Leclerc. It was a really good move. I'm sure, my family will be cheering that on. I mean, he really gotten him into that, final chicane before the final 2 corners. Can't believe Charles, didn't defend that, but it was an opportunistic move. He made it stick. Congratulations, to him. Deserved the 5th place, but, that really should have been Hamilton's. Leclerc didn't offer much of a resistance. Obviously, he knew on old hards and, on kind of the medium worn softs, Hamilton was significantly faster, but then he ran out of the brakes, right? With pretty much, 2 laps to go, so you could have clearly seen, the brakes going, and, we also pretty much, today before the Singaporean race also had some car problems, so we know how frustrating it feels. And then, Hamilton, as a result, he was unable to make lots of the corners, gotten 5-second, time penalty for apparently cutting the corners. So Alonso then finished 7th, Hamilton 8th, only 4 points, what easily could have been 10, and many, many more. But it was all about qualifying, and in a race, there's not much you can do, right? Especially you go from medium hard, you don't have that undercut. So clearly, the best strategy would have been to just run the mediums long, then switch to the softs, and perhaps even the guys, if they would get stuck behind you, right? Because we could have gotten into the lead, maybe with Russell it would have been close, but if we would have been able to, for example, be there with Leclerc, with Hamilton, and for example Russell or Verstappen, Norris, behind, and they would not be able to overtake us, which would have been maybe possible, but it's hard to tell. Obviously, that would have been a winning strategy, because one of them, would stay there, block the lead, right? The other one would basically pit and would be able to make up so much time, as it went. Kudos to Russell for basically showing his speed, and this is how the 18th round of the championship finished. So let's take a look at it over here. Okay. So over here, I'm sure you guys can see it very, very nicely on this beautiful scarlet red retina iMac. Okay, let me pull it down a little bit here so I can see it as well. So George Russell winning in the end relatively comfortably, because once you've gotten to the big markers, the first up and straight has fallen apart, and Norris tried very hard to overtake, but when you're on the same strategy, it's pretty much impossible. For Oscar Piastri, again the touch caused by Verstappen, it caused a bit of a riffle. Obviously McLaren, they are celebrating the Constructors' Championship. I haven't seen Piastri there. I've seen obviously Norris with that the pink kind of the Pirelli cap, but it was a bit surprising that he wasn't actually there to celebrate it, because might be the last constructors title for a while. 5th Antonelli, good job, but again Hamilton should have been there. 6 Leclerc, 7 Hamilton, and 8 obviously then Alonso. But because you can see Hamilton only finished 4 tenths ahead of Alonso, and because he's gotten 5-second time penalty because he basically couldn't brake as the brakes really let go off at a really scenic place from where you can see the Marina Bay Sands, the Madeline, the Esplanades, right? Again the Singaporean, for example, flyer right in front of it. From that place, that final chicane, the brakes, he basically, was unable, to make some of the corners. So a bit harsh, but what does it matter, right? 9, then Oliver Berman, good job, finally living up to his potential. And 10, Carlos Sainz. Williams was disqualified for the DRS, obviously, infringement, but the fact that they were able to come back and they just ran the medium for very long and then switch to soft. Smart strategy on their part, I have to say. So this is what it means for the Drivers' Championship, which is now the only championship to be decided. I definitely recommend to Formula One, to bring in the Sprint Championship, the Sprint Drivers and Constructors' Championship, especially with still half of the sprints to go. It would make the season more exciting. But hey, I guess I would have to be in the lead of the Formula One or in that Scarlet Ferrari winning races. So Oscar Piastri leads with 336 points. Lando Norris is 22 points behind on 314 points. And then we have the reigning world champion aiming for that 5th title, which only Michael Schumacher has achieved. Max Verstappen 273 points. So obviously, being 63 points behind, he's made up some places, as you can see, but again, it will be interesting to see what happens on the drivers' tracks. But I think that's as close as he will get to challenge for the title. For George Russell, Mercedes 237 points. You can see that the both drivers who really don't like each other, Verstappen and Russell 273, Russell 237. They have the same amount of points, and I guess that's how it will stay in the table. 5th, Charles Leclerc for Ferrari. It would be great if he could get at least one race victory before the season's over. 173 points. Lewis Hamilton only on measly 125 points. We also hope, apart from the sprint, that he can at least get on a podium and win a race this season. Then we have of course we have 7th, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, Mercedes 88 points. 8, Alexander Albon, Williams 70 points. Decent race, but again disqualified with Sainz in qualifying, so it was too difficult for him. 9, Isaac Hadjar, Racing Bulls 39 points. 10, Nico Hülkenberg, kicks over 37 points. Did a great job when he was trying to overtake the Colapinto, locked his rear wheels that he didn't end up in the wall. And now look at this, 11, Fernando Alonso, now from Spain, Aston Martin, 36 points, driver of the day, and, he's really, the best of the midfield. It would be interesting to see what he could still, well over 40 years old, what he could do in a top running car, but I think maybe his teammates and the drivers around him flatter him a little bit. 12 is then Carlos Sainz, Williams, 32 points. 13, then his teammate Lance Stroll, Aston Martin, finally behind him in the standings, 32 points. 14, Liam Lawson, Racing Bulls, 30 points. 15 is then, of course, Esteban Ocon has 28 points. 16, we then have Pierre Gasly, Alpine, 20 points. 17, Yuki Tsunoda, Red Bull Racing, not scoring, being very anonymous again, 20 points. Rumors are that Hadjar is replacing him at Red Bull and he won't be continuing in Formula 1. Then we have 18, Gabriel Bortoleto kicks over 18 points, right? 18, and then 19, Oliver Berman has 18 points. Obviously, he doesn't want to be the last one of the drivers who have gotten the points, the last of the full-time drivers, so to speak, because 28, Franco Colapinto, can he get any points? If not, I think that's his career. Over at Alpine, 0 points. 21st, Jack Doohan, Alpine, 0 points. Could he be, in for a sensational return? I don't think so, but, stranger things have happened. Now here, the Constructors' Championship. For the 2025 seasons, it's already decided. Sadly, it goes the McLaren way. McLaren leading with 650 points over here, and leading. Congratulations to them, but we will be taking over these titles very soon, right? Now here, Mercedes obviously, 325 points. They have a bit of a buffer. We were on nice 300 points, but then Hamilton's gotten that 5-second penalty, so we are third, 298 points. And that puts us ever so closer to fourth place. Red Bull Racing, 290 points. So we gotta make sure we are back on the pace, quickly, because we can be kind of confident that Tsunoda won't be scoring a lot. But if Verstappen is really able to mount the title challenge, finishing fourth, I'm not sure Vasseur, for example, would continue into the next year. Fifth is then Williams, 102 points. Sixth, Stay Racing Bulls with 72 points. 7, Aston Martin, 68 points. 8, Kick Sauber, 55 points. 9, Haas, 46 points. And 10, Alpine, 20 points. So the Constructors is decided very early, obviously, this season, due to the McLaren dominance. Here you can see the driver's title, everything to play for. So it's going to be actually very exciting to see what's going to happen there, especially now the gloves are off, because as you know, that first lap accident, obviously Piastri didn't take it lightly, so that will, I think, give plenty of opportunities, if there's going to be some infighting. Obviously Verstappen knows if he can make the McLaren drivers crash, that will be very good for his championship hopes. I think Russell's pretty much, we are also sadly, I think, have to admit, after the third, fourth of the season, that we are pretty much out of it. And, but let's end it on a high, so that we can build up for the new regulations for the 2026. Again, lots of races, I believe we could have done much better, including this one. It was all about that qualifying, or perhaps, really running, that two-stop strategy, because overtaking was possible. And, at least when I was dominating in Singapore, I found it to be the winning strategy. So this was the exclusive race reaction from me. I'm the Smiling Sun champion over here, reporting from our home sweet home over here on this, very lovely, very special day, the so-called Moon Festival, as they call it. The weather is beautiful. Maybe you haven't seen it because Singapore is obviously a night race, but yeah, there's this big full moon, and that means that all the lovers, especially the Ferrari lovers, should kiss underneath that moon to be provided with that energy, luck, and the speed to win the remaining fourth of the Formula 1 2025 World Championship season. That's right. So everybody over here, again, we will sign off. This was it from Europe, and especially from Asia. We don't, of course, count the Middle East. We will be back there in North America mostly, but also in the Central and South America. As the Drivers' Championship is heating up, and as we aiming, to reclaim that second spot and finish at least equal our exploits from the last season, which was obviously that brilliant Olympic 2024 season. We will see you in the place where we, of course, often celebrate, at the Texas Roadhouse, where we are eating and enjoying, these steaks and, the great, for example, strawberry raspberry drinks. So definitely, check it out. It will be the fourth sprint Grand Prix of the season, and I will be aiming to win my fourth Formula 1 World Championship. That's right. So sadly, have to focus on me now a little bit, but that's the beauty of it. And you guys, I hope you enjoyed the race reaction. But now, let's relax, let's enjoy, the holidays, and we will be back with all the energy, and all the love, and all the speed for the final fourth of the season! We love Singapore, the place where Ferrari almost always wins! Forza Ferrari!